to the World Massage Conference.
Hello and welcome to the World Massage Conference pre-conference series for the 2010 conference program. I'm your host, Eric Brown, along with my co-host, Scott Dartnell, and I want to welcome everyone on board for this presentation with famed massage expert Thomas Myers on anatomy trains. Before we pull out of the station tonight, though, we'd like to thank our global sponsor, Massage Envy. Massage Envy is the leading employer of massage therapists in the United States. To discover the benefits of choosing Massage Envy as your career, visit their website at www.massageenvycareers.com. And we'd also like to thank all our daily sponsors that make all of this possible: Massage Warehouse, Massage Today, Bon Vital, BioFreeze, the National Certification for Therapeutic Massage and Bodywork, Massage Magazine, and the Upledger Institute. Now, this is the second of 3 pre-conference broadcasts, and we want to thank everyone for coming. Make sure that you mark your calendars for our next one on Wednesday, November 10th, when we'll have Ben Benjamin on the line. Tonight's presentation will be recorded, and it will be available for replay for you anytime, and it will be available for about 24 hours following this live event. Now, while we're waiting for others to come on the line, I'd just like to go over a few things with you. The live Fall 2010 World Massage Conference is going to be happening on November 15th and 16th. And you'll be able to hear some of the top massage experts from around the world and interact with them live like we're doing here tonight. You can ask our guest, Tom Myers, any questions you have by clicking on the blue Ask a Question button that you'll see on the broadcast page here, and then just type in your question in the Q&A box. And if you stay around after the broadcast, you'll be able to chat with Tom personally. How cool is that? I'm giddy with excitement. This is very cool. So, in fact, why not click the blue chat button that you see on the broadcast page right now to enter our chat room and hang out with some of your colleagues from around the world and find out what they're up to as we go through the broadcast. I'd also suggest that you print up the Fall 2010 conference schedule. You'll see another blue link on the broadcast page. It says Notes, and if you click that, you'll be able to click a link that will open up the schedule for you. Take it, review the presenters that you want to hear and chat with live, and then mark those times off your schedule. And if you have to miss any of those broadcasts, it's not a problem. Anytime the conference is over, all you need to do is log into the site at a time that's convenient for you, and the recorded replays are available. And if you're registered for the World Massage Conference, you can log in and view these archived presentations, including this Anatomy Train presentation, anytime, as well as take a quiz to get a certificate of completion for continuing education reporting. And if you need NCBTMB specific certificates, these are available for a one-time fee of only $25 per conference to cover administrative costs. And if you're not registered for the conference, then we encourage you to do so right away. When you register for the Fall 2010 conference, you'll get immediate access to all the Spring 2010 recordings in your very own replay room, and you'll be able to do quizzes to obtain CE certificates. Now you'll see the register button on the left side of your screen. So that's the one you'll click. So again, if you're not registered, why not do it tonight? So here tonight with us on the World Massage Conference to start off our second Fall 2010 conference pre-conference broadcast, we bring you one of the world's top leaders in the massage industry, Tom Myers. Thomas Myers will be introducing us to a whole new perspective on the human body. Anatomy Train's myofascial meridians is a unique new map of the fascial connections through the muscles that leads to new understanding of the connectivity in the body and directly to new therapeutic strategies, especially for long-standing compensatory patterns and client stance and movement. Thomas Myers is the author of the best-selling Anatomy Trains, supporting video programs and over 50 articles for journals and trade magazines. Tom currently directs Kinesis, Inc., which offers continuing education and certification programs worldwide. Tom studied directly with Drs. Ida Rolf, Moshe Feldenkrais, and Buckminster Fuller during the 70s, followed by movement studies with Emil Conrad, Judith Aston, and various martial arts. Tom's work is influenced by the European approach to cranial and visceral osteopathy. Tom has practiced integrative bodywork for over 30 years in a variety of clinical and cultural settings. He is a founder member of the International Association of Structural Integrators and a member of the Rolf Institute, the Guild for Structural Integration, and the Associated Massage and Bodywork Professionals. Tom, welcome to the World Massage Conference.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I want to extend my thanks to you and Scott and Marla for having done such a great job at putting this thing together. It's really exciting to be connected all over the world and not have to get in an airplane to do it. I need to apologize to your listeners because my voice is a little ragged, and I'm a little ragged because I got caught in those windstorms in Chicago yesterday, so I haven't had much sleep in the last 48 hours, but I will endeavor to do my best for the next 40 or so.
That's all we can ask, that you do your best.
Oh,
and,
thanks.
I think and I think we do have Judith Aston on the line, who I mentioned in your bio there. I think so. If Judith is on the line.
Oh, that's great. Hello to Judith. Long time no hear from. I hope you're well.
So, Tom, I'm just going to turn the mic over to you and let you do your presentation. And for listeners, if you have any questions for Tom as he's going through his presentation, then just simply click I think there's an Ask a Question link on the broadcast page. Just click that and type your question in the box, and we will get to as many of those as possible before the end of the broadcast. Okay, over to you, Tom.
Good. So this is a fairly simple set of concepts in the slideshow that we have, and I'm going to endeavor to go through them fairly quickly so that we have maximum time for questions. So if we're on the first slide, I just happened to call this thing anatomy trains way back when, but if you had a formal name for it, it's myofascial meridians. Meridians because they travel like the meridians of longitude, and myofascial because it's just the myofascial body that I'm talking about. If we can have the next slide, please. I've been very fortunate to study with a lot of great people, but the three on the screen had a lot of influence on me. Ida Rolf, my contact with Ida Rolf began in 74 and lasted until her death in 79, but it was really, I had short periods of time in which I was actually in training with her, but her thought and her way of being and her honesty had a lot of influence on me. And putting that together, putting her ideas about fascia together with Bucky Fuller's ideas about tensegrity and Moshe Feldenkrais and Judith Aston's and other people's idea about movement, I have tried to come up with something that was a kind of synthetic way of putting anatomy together in a different way. So with all respect to my teachers, and the inspiration's all theirs and the mistakes are all mine, let's go to the next slide. What I was looking for was the fabric in the body, and Ida Rolf gave me this idea, gave us all this idea of the fascia as a fabric through the body. And I was engaged as an anatomy teacher in the Rolf Institute, and I was trying to teach the students connected anatomy, and just came up with a game of sort of hooking things together. Well, you could hook this muscle to that muscle because they run in a straight line, and do you see how this muscle, the serratus anterior, runs into the external oblique? And so it started out as a game, and then I thought, this is interesting, and did more on it and turned it into a system. And then, as you can see on the left here, it is actually a dissectable item. That is, I'm sorry for the gross pictures, there's only a couple of them. But when I came out with the book, people said, well, this is very nice, but it's just all in your imagination. So I went into the dissection lab to bring this out. So we've dissected all of the anatomy trains that appear in the book, and so to do the concept here on this slide, you really can see these trains as a single line of tension that goes through the body and linking up several muscles and fascial structures. So there's a line from your toes to your nose that runs all the way up the back of your body. You can also see it as a continuous plane of fascia because all of those pieces are linked through the fascia between them, and they're also linked by the fascia that runs over them in the sort of body stocking. But that's not pictured here. What is pictured here is a series of connected myofascial units. You start at the bottom of that picture, that's the plantar fascia, and then you see a little white thing where the heel rested. That's a kind of bridle into which the heel rests, and then there's the Achilles tendon and the gastrocnemius. And to my surprise, there's a nice, strong fascial link between the heads of the gastrocnemius, which you can see kind of going where they would go to the femur there. But there's connection with the tails of the hamstrings, with the tendons of the hamstrings, which are in turn connected at the top to the sacrotuberous ligament, which is in turn connected to all those back muscles that run all the way up to the scalp. and the scalp across the top of the head to the nose. Which actually reminds me of something else that I wanted to say at the beginning of this, because this afternoon I was so tired I was wondering whether I was going to be able to do this thing, and I was lying down for a minute, and as I got up from lying down, I thought, oh, I can do body work, and I put my thumbs between my nasal bones and my frontal bone and gave myself a little cranial work, and then I found a few trigger points, so I did some trigger point release, and then I got up and shook myself out and was satisfied with a satisfying click of L3 going back into place after it had been out in last night's car. I just was struck with such a wonder of riches that we have in this bodywork field, and they're all useful, they're all fun, they all do some good for people, and I really want to be as inclusive as possible in thinking about these things. So we'll talk some about method, but this Anatomy Trains map, and it is a game, so if we go to the next slide, we'll see the rules of the game. You could carve anything out of the body. You can just take a scalpel and carve whatever you want out of the body. In fact, people have been carving 600 muscles out of the body for 500 years now, and I think it's time to take those little pieces and start putting them together. And it is the fascia that draws the muscles together. I'm not going to go into what's in the cranial cavity tonight or in the ventral cavity. We're just going to look at these myofascial meridians, the ones that run through the voluntary musculature. So to do it, you have to follow the grain of the muscle and the fascia. Muscle has a fiber direction, as you know, and fascia has also a fiber direction. And so the rules of the game require that we go from piece to piece with the fibers going in that direction and not with walls going in between that would go in another direction, because then you couldn't have a line of pull, because that's what we're doing, is finding lines of pull. We call what you would call myofascia or a muscle, we call a track, and the places where they get tacked down to bones we call a station. And we're doing that to emphasize the fact that it is just a station. It's not the end of the fascia. There is no separate thing called a hamstring in a body. That's something that we do when we go in there with a scalpel. But that has no reality. Not only does it have no reality in the body, it has no reality in your brain. You don't think in terms of muscles either. This is new from the research. Your brain is not arranged according to your muscles. It's arranged according to single neuromotor units that are controlling 10 to 100 or so muscular fibers, and you don't think in terms of deltoid and hamstrings. But anyway, the other thing that's on here is expresses and locals, those erector spinae that you see going up. This is another specimen of the same thing laid over a skeleton, and the erector spinae that you see going up the schoolroom skeleton's back have various layers of musculature there. And generally speaking, it's not true all over the body, but in a lot of the places, the muscles that lie on the top are the ones that cover the most joints, and the ones that lie deeper to that are shorter and cover fewer joints or a single joint. And we find expressives and locals to be very important in analyzing posture and decompensating the compensations. So now if we can just go to the next slide, I want to be clear about what Anatomy Trains is not. It's not a comprehensive theory of manipulative therapy. I think there are all kinds of great theories in osteopathy and in structural integration and visceral work, and many traditions in personal training, fitness, all kinds of stuff that are quite valid. We don't move according to the Anatomy Trains. You don't contract the front line and then contract the back line to walk. The front line and the back line help keep you steady as you walk. So it's much more a theory of stability and the transmission of strain from one piece of myofascia to the other. It's not designed to be a comprehensive theory of movement. And it's certainly not the only way to, it's not the right way to parse body structure. It's a way to parse body structure. I'm hoping to convince you that thinking in terms of individual muscles is not the only way to parse body structure either. We can go to the next slide. I think Anatomy Trains is definitely worthwhile in explaining postural compensations, the one shoulder higher than the other thing, because if you attack those kinds of things as single muscle problems instead of systemic problems, we tend to go for symptoms instead of systems, and I'm really a strong advocate for systems-oriented therapy. So the anatomy trains is one map that would give you an explanation of why one structure is affecting another one at quite a distance. So we've all seen you do something to the foot and the low back gets fixed, or you open up the belly and the neck eases up. So this is one attempt to map that down. And being a student of Bucky Fuller, I see this in terms of tensegrity, that I'm not going to take time to explain tensegrity tonight, but that the integrity of the body is determined by the tensional fibers pulling in and the bones, the compressional fibers, pulling back out, and that it's much more like a tensegrity than it is like a crane, which is kind of how we tend to think of it, that the skeleton is a crane and the individual muscles are like cables that move the crane around. If we see on the next page, you'll see a great example of that kind of anatomy. Let's take everything off the skeleton except this one muscle, the biceps. So what would this muscle do if it was the only muscle on the body? Well, it would supinate the radial ulnar joint and flex the elbow joint and do some kind of diagonal flexion of the shoulder. And so then we say that's what a biceps is. That's what a biceps does. And all the force goes from the bottom of the biceps to the top of the biceps, and thus is communicated to the two bones at either end. And I'm here tonight to say it never happens. The muscles just don't work this way. It's an imagination that we've done, and it's been very helpful, but it doesn't explain. Well, if you look at this picture, you'll see three things are missing from this picture of the biceps. One is the neighbors to the east and west, triceps, coracobrachialis, brachialis, supinator, which turn out to be affected and are affected by the action of the biceps. We thought the muscles slid independently over each other, and now recently we know that they don't. The fascia between the muscles, where we slip our scalpel through to separate them and to make muscles in the first place for the anatomy books, that tissue is not loose and gliding, or I should put it this way, it's loose and gliding for a little bit, and then it effectively transfers the strain from one muscle to the other. So in this picture, we're missing the east and west muscles, and the gospel according to anatomy trains is we're also missing the north and south muscles. This is the meridians of longitude. So at the top end, the short head of the biceps connects into the pectoralis minor, for instance. At the south end, it connects to the fascia there on the radius, which is not there in the picture, that takes you right down to the thenar muscles in the thumb. So single muscle pictures like this are also missing their north-south relatives, and that's what I was trying to document in anatomy trains. And, of course, more recently it's come into our focus that there is a fascial sheath bringing the nerve and the artery and the vein to the muscle, and if that sheath is short, that will affect the muscle. So three things have been taken away in this picture, and then we've defined the muscle as doing only that thing that we see in the picture. It's really an artifact of dissection. If we take the next slide, you'll see a different kind of picture, which would be, this is a piece of the thigh, that's the femur that you're looking at, and the quadriceps in the upper left, and the hamstrings and adductors in the lower right. And the muscle has been taken away so that you can see the fascial web. This was done by Rolfer Jeffrey Lynn, and I wish I could set it to spinning for you because it's a really nice thing to see. We have 500 years of anatomy, and we don't have this map yet. We don't have the map of the fascial web. We think of the fascia as the saran wrap that goes around the muscles, but it's so much more than that. As you can see here, there's the outer rim around the outside, which would be the fascia lata, with the iliotibial tract on the outside, and all those fascial divisions going through the adductors, through the hamstrings, these intermuscular septa, which are walls in anatomy, but you don't ever see those walls because when they cut it into the separate muscles, they use those walls to cut it into the separate muscles. So we have a map of the nervous system, we have a map of the circulatory system. I hope some of you have seen that in the body world, but we just, 500 years later, don't have a map of the fascial system. So I hope someday we get that, because if we go to the next slide, you'll see in this photograph of the sternum done by Robert Ron Thompson, you see the fascia from the upper right to the lower left. That leg of the X is a lot heavier and stronger than the fascia that's going from the upper left to the lower right. And We don't know what this person did. You don't know too much about the people you get to dissect, but presumably he was doing left-handed work. He was left-handed and doing work that put more strain across his chest in that direction, and the fascia will respond to that and lay down extra heavy fascia where you do extra heavy work, and it will, I was going to say shorten, but it simply will be created in a shortened place is a better way to say that. If you are hunched over, for instance, or if you were hunched over and had the left shoulder forward, you might develop something like that in the chest. But you can certainly undo that with yoga. You could undo that with exercise if it was scientifically applied and individually applied. Another way to come after this is by manual therapy, of course. So the fascia is a tissue that holds compensations. Actually, let's go to the next slide. This is the saran wrap around the muscles. However, what I wanted you to see this for is you see the saran wrap around these two muscles is connected with what Gil Hedley famously calls fuzz. And I compare this fuzz to the rungs on a ladder. So if the muscle on the left and the muscle on the right were the two stanchions of the ladder, then this fascia in between, which is called loose or areolar tissue, the intermuscular fascia, are the rungs of the ladder. And Ida Rolf used to talk about one muscle sliding on another, that's what we were looking for, and that was a good way of talking for her then, but it really isn't the way it is. I have done a lot of dissection, and I've never seen a muscle that isn't connected to another muscle except down at the tendons where they really have to slide. So going through the points on this slide quickly, your fascia is your richest sensory organ. We now know that there are more sensors in your fascia than in any other organ in your body, more than in your eye, more than in your ear, certainly more than in your muscles. There are 10 times as many sensory organs in your fascia as there are in your muscles, and there's even the argument that the one in your muscles, the muscle spindles, are actually measuring what's happening to the fascia inside the muscle. So the poor muscles are pretty dumb, and the fascia is pretty smart. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Secondly, the fascia is a continuous interconnected web. We talk about the central tendon, the diaphragm, and the thoracolumbar fascia and the plantar fascia as if they were separate units. But ever since the third week of your embryonic development, your fascia has been one continuous web. And you can cut it with a surgeon's knife. You can tear it in trauma. It will fray with age as you get color the hair of mine, and that's what creates the wrinkles. But when you die, it will still be one continuous interconnected web. So this is maybe a New Age idea. Oh, everything's connected to everything else. But in this case, that is the scientific truth, and the idea that there's a separate thing called a plantar fascia or an iliotibial tract or sacral fascia, that's the part that's actually not a lie, but a metaphor, and we've kind of forgotten that it's a metaphor and taken it up as the truth. And because it's a continuous interconnected web, it distributes strain around the body. This is really important, especially in long-term thinking about long-term injury or people with pains that have been around for a while. If you have a whiplash, that's a problem of your neck for a few weeks. It's a problem of your spine for a few months. And after that, it's a problem of your whole body. It really requires a whole-body solution if it's still being bothersome. If you're still getting your neck adjusted 6 months after a whiplash, then maybe you ought to look a little farther away because injuries don't stay local, they go global. Fascia is really the tissue that holds us in shape. You can certainly argue about that. Your shape is determined by your muscles, and it's certainly determined by your nerves. But what holds that shape and what, modulates the tension and the compression in the body is this fascial webbing system. And as I was saying before, it holds the compensations. So if we go on to the next slide, what is this stuff that we're calling fascia? I'm, by the way, using the word badly because the word fascia only applies to certain histology and certain topology of the connective tissue, but I'm using it to designate this whole collagen web that goes through bones, goes through cartilage, surrounds the organs, invests the brain, surrounds the brain with the dura. It's, as I said before, everywhere you want to be. So the extracellular matrix is, or the ECM, is the environment that all the cells come in. I like this picture because it's really as close to fresh as you can get. And in this tissue is water, and lots of it, hopefully. Some of that water is bound to the kind of fern-like glue that's in the connective tissue. And when that's bound to the glue, it's kind of squishy like a sponge. And there's unbound water, too, that's just flowing around like lymphatic fluid. There are fibers, lots of them. Collagen is the predominant one. There are 12 types of collagen whose differences need not bother us now. There's elastin, that's more like a rubber band, and reticulin, which, again, we'll leave behind in going through this quickly. The most important stuff, I've really got fascinated by the collagen fibers, and that's what we were all thinking about in the early days of the Rolf Institute, but really the glue, I'm calling it glue, it's proteoaminoglycans or glycoaminoglycans or mucopolysaccharides, ground substance. These are all fancy words for snot because we're really held together with mucus. Cartilage is really dry, coagulated mucus. I'm sorry, I'll let this go. And the muscles have this kind of slippery layer in between them. The bursae where the tendons slip are just modifications of this. The body modifies either the fiber or the glue or lets in more water or pushes out more water to make everything from bone to cartilage to ligament to tendon to fascial sheet to actually the cornea of your eye. Lots and lots of things are made out of these three elements, just in different proportions. If you think of the glue as something like Jell-O, that's another perhaps not so gross way of thinking about it. A very small amount of Jell-O will bind a whole lot of water, and that's true in your body too. You have these colloidal substances, these GAGs, GAGs, that bind a lot of water and make these gluey kinds of substrates for organs to move back and forth in, for muscles to move back and forth in, and they wrap nearly everything in the body. Okay, so that's the end of the discourse on the fascia, and then I want to go into the lines, but Eric, why don't we take this moment for your break?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom. I just want to remind the listeners that if you have any questions for Tom, just type them in the Q&A box. You just need to click the blue Ask a Question box, and that will pop up for you. Now, before you do that, I just want to tell you that we're going to be choosing someone who submitted a question as our prize winner tonight, and we're giving away a prize package worth $1,286, which includes a grasshopper massage chair from Massage Warehouse, a large selection of BioFreeze products, and a craniosacral course from the Upledger Institute. As well, stick around after this formal presentation, and we'll be showing you some video that Tom has prepared for us. That's a fantastic video, Tom, so I'm looking forward to showing that to everyone. And as well, Tom is going to be going into the chat room to talk with you personally. To get into the chat room, all you need to do is click that little blue chat box that you see on the broadcast page. Just enter in your name in that box that pops up and submit, and you will be in the chat room. And for those of you here tonight who are not signed up for the Fall 2010 conference, I want to encourage you to do so now. You'll see a bright green registration link on the broadcast page. When you register, you'll have access to over 40 of the world's leading massage experts. And on the broadcast page, if you click the blue button again that says Notes, and then there's a link there that will take you to the presenters. There's a fun little interactive flash page that will pop up with all their photos on a table, and you can sort through their photos. You can double-click to zoom in on them, double-click to shrink them, and move them around a little bit. So take a look at some of the presenters that are going to be with us in 2010. It's just like the Academy Awards of massage. These are all the superstars who you've always wanted to meet, and you can interact with them here at the World Massage Conference. Also, in that notes section, you'll see the fall schedule, and I'd suggest you print that up and just mark times off your calendar for the presenters that you really want to hear live and ask questions of. We don't expect you to sit at your computer for 25 hours, so everything's recorded for you, and you can access the presentations at a time and a place that's convenient for you. Another benefit for registration is that registrants can get CE certificates for each of these presentations. And if you need NCB, TMB specific credits, those are available too. I know you're not signing up specifically for the credits, but it's a fantastic bonus. So again, want to encourage you to register for the conference, submit a question for Tom, and when you do so, if you can include your email address so we can contact you, as well as where you're from, that would be fantastic, and we'll choose a winner before the end of the broadcast tonight. Okay, I'm going to go back to you, Tom.
All right, Eric, if we could go to slide 12, the superficial back one, the next one. So I'm just going to, that was a little bit sort of more generally about the fascial system, but I can wax on and on and on about that for hours. So let's just do a quick tour of the lines that I think are the most common pathways for fascial force transmission. Certainly people with accidents, scoliosis, neurological problems can invent them of their own, but these are the common pathways in normal movement. So if we start with the superficial back line, that's the one that you saw dissected a couple times before, and it goes all the way from the plantar fascia, all the way from the bottom of the toes, which used to be part of the back of our leg when your mama's mama was a cat. But the fascia is still connected around the heel in a kind of bridle that runs up the lower leg and up with the hamstrings and up across the back of the pelvis to the erector spinae and across the scalp, as we said before. And I do think that these lines have meaning to them, and although I can, again, wax poetic about this for quite a bit, if we go to the next slide, the superficial back line, if you look at it, goes over the primary and secondary curves of the body. Now, primary and secondary curves are usually just applied to the thoracic and the sacrococcygeal curve because they're the primary ones that were there when you were a baby and embryo, fetus, and are still there in your adult life, but then you get secondary curves in the neck and in the lumbar. But if we just extend that concept through the whole body, your cranial curve is really a primary curve, and then it goes secondary, primary in the pelvis, and then if you look in the standing body, the knee is like a secondary curve, slightly bent, and the heel is a primary curve, and the arches are a secondary curve. It's interesting because you develop the secondary curves really from the top down. The cervical curve develops first as the baby lifts its head, and lumbar curve later as it sits up and crawls, and the knee curve is going to be set at least when they stand, and the arches really don't come in until they've been walking for a while. So there's this kind of growth from top to bottom in these curves, and it's all covered by this one fascial sheet with these different muscles in it, if you prefer. But the balance of the superficial back line is necessary for easy upright standing, and if you get tight in the lumbars, or as in this example here on the writing part, if you have somebody with hyperextended knees, they're shoving those knees back and making a primary curve out of what should be a secondary curve, and so then they have to compensate in the lumbars or compensate in the arches or compensate in the neck. It gets, what happens in one place gets shoved to another. So a kind of easy, upright stance that, if you'll forgive the word, looks mature, talks to you about a well-balanced superficial back line. If we go on to the next slide, that's counterbalanced by the superficial front line, which goes in two pieces, from the toes to the hip, and then jumps over to the pubic bone and goes from the pubic bone up to the skull. And I don't know if you can see it in that other little picture, but it goes over the skull, goes up from the sternocleidomastoids and then right over the lambdoidal suture for those of you in the craniosacral realm. It exerts a lot of pull on the asterion where the tentorium attaches. But anyway, this front line also covers all of our soft squidgy bits. Breasts, genitals, belly, throat are all along that line, and therefore it's associated with protecting ourselves and tends to get short. And only humans are stupid enough to stand up and put all those soft sensitive bits on the front, presenting to everybody. So if we go to the next slide, this is a very old famous picture of a man just before and just after somebody fired a blank pistol behind his head. And you see that you could draw a straight line now from just behind his ear where the sternocleidomastoid starts right down to his pubic bone and beyond into his leg. So the startle response is just really a violent shortening of the superficial front line. And if you do this with an animal, they will shorten that front line, and then 30 minutes later the danger will be gone and they'll straighten up again. The trouble with us is we tend to shorten, and then because we're so responsive to our brain rather than the outside world, our inner world, we can keep that trauma going for 20 or 30 years. And you'll see this in cases of psychological trauma, but you'll also see it in cases of physical trauma. And I dare say that you've seen patterns like this walking into your office. So obviously this front line and the back line counterbalance each other, and what we would be looking for in therapy is a well-balanced between the front and the back line. But they're clearly not the same. The front line is full of fast twitch fibers and that kind of protective instinct, and the back line is full of slow twitch fibers and has that kind of unfolding instinct, unfolding into maturity. But there, on either side of them, is the lateral line. Let's go to the next slide, which is symmetrical on either side. It goes from the outer ankle, the outer arch, right up with the peroneals up the side of the body, and the iliotibial tract, and the abductors, and the external abdominals and intercostals, and the top little X there on the neck is the sternocleidomastoid and the splenius. And this will stabilize the body in lateral bends. You know, when your mama was a fish, way back in our evolutionary history, we used the lateral line to go side to side. But now we use it more to stabilize movement so that your head stays steady even as your hips swing back and forth underneath. So the lateral line is more of a stabilizing line in humans, but certainly with handedness and any kind of job that is one-sided, those are going to change. And frequently, you can easily measure the change in these two lines by looking at the level of the shoulders, the level of the hips, or the level of the knees. And if we go on to the next slide, the spiral line there gives you a double helix around the trunk, and then a kind of jump rope that goes in under the leg. This is a wonderful sling, and this is something that was really not around in the days when I studied with Ida Rolf, this idea of the spiral going around the body. And so I've added this into my own structural integration mix to deal with how the body deals with external rotations. Internal rotations are something else, but I'm going to give you one more dissection picture if we go to the next, just to see the muscle on the towards the top of the screen is the biceps femoris hamstring, and you can see how that's connected into the peroneus longus, which goes around the ankle and under the foot, and then that's connected to the tibialis anterior, which is the muscle in the lower left, and then up the iliotibial tract to the tensor fascia lata, which is the muscle in the lower right. A yoga teacher from Vancouver was kind enough to put his leg in there for the photograph, but I didn't feel good laying cadaverous tissue over his leg. So it's a little bit confused, but you can see how the arch would be somewhat determined by the relative pulls on these two sides. So it's really, you have to look to where the pelvis is, where the knee is, and where all this myofascialature is to really understand somebody's pronated arch or supinated foot. So these things, the problems may be local, but the solutions are global. If we go to the next slide, there are 4 arm lines, and the anatomy is quite complicated, but there are 2 in front, a superficial one and a deep one there on the top, and there are 2 in the back, a deep one and a superficial one there on the bottom. And I've dissected all of those out. They really are fascial continuities all the way from the axial skeleton out to the tips of the fingers. And they're named for how they are in the shoulder, but they end up going to the 4 corners of the hand. And because the shoulders are so much more mobile, there are different crossovers, like the 2 heads of the biceps go in 2 different places, and actually the biceps have 2 feet, and they go to 2 different places. So these arm lines are not as strict and neat as they are in the leg, because of the high mobility of your shoulder and your arm. You need muscles that cross over between the lines. If we go to the next slide, what we haven't done yet is connect one girdle to its contralateral partner. Obviously, these kinds of things are used in sports activities. Think of kayaking or throwing a javelin, but throwing a baseball I was very lucky to work with the rehab team down at the Red Sox a few weeks ago, so I've been thinking about these lines because baseball pitchers are using these to accelerate the hand by means of the leg by anchoring it to the opposite leg, and that happens across the back and it happens across the front. And of course, it is equally true for the soccer players. For those of you who are into European football, the motions of the arms counterbalance the momentum of the legs through these lines. Finally, if we can take one more. Again, one of these dissection pictures, because I just think this is so fabulous. This is what I would call the core line. I know people have many different definitions of core, but this is a single myofascial piece that runs all the way from the bottom of your toes and the bottom of your foot up the inner ankle, behind the knee, and up the adductor muscles to the psoas muscle. So that's the the left leg that you're seeing, but then we pick up both sides of the body at the psoas, and you can see where the lumbar spine would be in that little black square in the middle. And then that's the diaphragm being held out, and the triangle above that is the heart, and you see the two little lungs looking like ears, and above that is the fellow's tongue. So I'm sorry to be gross about this, but it is fascinating to me that there is a single fascial connection that includes your heart and your diaphragm, and the muscles of your groin, by the way, that goes all the way from your jaw, all the way from your tongue down to your ankle. I have, again, we've made this dissection several times, and I'm quite sure that it's possible to do, and I think these kinds of, now that we've demonstrated them, that these kinds of things have to be answered to in terms of, is this a valid way of thinking or not? I'm still waiting for a few things. I'm waiting for somebody else to do it in another lab, and I'm saying that if you pull on this fabric, that it pulls into another part of the fabric, but I'm just saying that has yet to be really proven, although the research that's coming in is very promising in that direction. So let me just finish with the final slide, which is the usual advertisement. anatomytrains.com is how to find us, and we're doing workshops. I have a faculty of 10 or so people that I really enjoy and that are doing workshops for me and with me. And those happen worldwide, a lot in the States and a lot in Europe. We also have certification trainings in my particular way of looking at the structural integration thing that we call KMI. And there's books and DVDs and lists of practitioners there also. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Eric. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. It's a fascinating look at the body, and you can really appreciate the connections when you take a look through these fascial meridians. It's fascinating. Now I know we have lots of listener questions. Tom, before we take questions, I'm going to ask Scott Dartnell, my co-host, to get online in a second. Can you just pick a number between, let's say, about 1 and 100?
Can I?
Yes.
Or is Scott doing that?
No, you. I'll let you choose.
Oh, all right. 52.
Okay, so we'll count through the questions, and if you are the 52nd question submitter, you're going to win tonight's prize that's worth
is that what I was doing?
$186. Yeah.
Well, in that case.
And that prize package includes a grasshopper massage chair from Massage Warehouse, a bunch of BioFreeze products, and a cranial sacral course from the Upledger Institute. So it's a fantastic package. So while Scott's asking questions, I'm going to start counting. And Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. Well, there's Tom, this is the most questions I've ever handled, so I'm going to do my best to get them to you in as quickly as possible. First, we're going to start with Kathleen Klein in Tampa, and she asks, can you explain the difference between scar tissue and fascial restrictions and how to evaluate the two conditions?
Yep. Fascial restrictions are in both the glue and the fiber, and they usually happen because of something mechanical, which may come from the muscle, which may come from some necessity from the outside, like the shoes you're wearing or the chair you're sitting in. But scar tissue involves changes in both the fiber, which tends to get thicker and matted. If you think of felt, you get a kind of felty feel for the collagen fibers that go under a scar, and then the glue in certain people. This is different in different people, but some people really have sort of welty scars where they get keloids from the ground substance that really harden up. And those scars are really quite hard to change, but the fascial restrictions, and some people have scars that are more like fascial restrictions, those are possible to change, and I would suggest that you approach it like felt, or not the way I first approached. I was a single dad, so this is not the way to approach your young daughter's hair. Take hair and brush and try to pass one through the other. That doesn't work. Just results in tears. But if you take a small amount of hair and pass the brush through that, and do that a little bit at a time, you'd think I'd know that, but it took me a while. So the same thing with the fascia. If you encounter these felty bits of fascia, you first need to roll them through to make sure that you sort of ease up and heat up that gluey stuff that's in between, and then you can comb the felt of the fascia into a more ordered form, usually by just doing repetitious stuff. Having said that, there are quite a few ways of dealing with scar tissue, but I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. We have another question from Lil Evans in Mount Lake Terrace, and the question is, do you know strategies for how to assess and treat the obturator externus if it's strained or sprained, since it's so tricky to palpate?
I do, but I think it's so tricky to palpate, I don't teach it until my advanced training, and I'm certainly not going to try to do it over the phone because it involves intricate and intimate approach to the bottom of the pelvis. But yes, it is possible to palpate, and yes, it is possible to treat, and yes, it is difficult.
I have another question from Joe Jensen in Armstrong, and understands that each therapy is different, but has noticed some similarities between the anatomy trains and Chinese meridians. And could you expand on that a little bit?
I can. I deliberately did not look at the Chinese meridians when I was writing the book. I did not want to shoehorn everything together and try to make it all fit. And it turned out that the anatomy trains that I found in Western fascial anatomy did have some overlap with the meridians, and why not? We're all looking at the same body, but I did not try to find them that way. But it does appear, if you follow the research of Hélène Langevin, Langevin, Hélène, French spelling of Helen, is her first name, and she has done just fabulous research on acupuncture and its effect on the connective tissue. So, and how the signaling in the connective tissue changes in response to acupuncture needles. So we may not be so far apart on this. But it wasn't that I deliberately was setting out to find those meridians. And I did use the word meridians, I know, in the title, but it really had more to do, to me, with the meridians of longitude and latitude. But I suppose I was being a bit cute and bringing in the
Okay. I have another question from Hugh Crozier in Auckland, New Zealand.
Yeah.
And he's interested to hear your views on pain in relation to body work. Rolfing is renowned for being painful, and you have stated that pain is not necessary to yield successful change.
Nope, and I'll tell you it's a good question, and I don't want to spend a half an hour on it, but I'm still ruminating on this one after 35 years. Certainly, the techniques that I was taught from Ida Rolf, I know that in her day she was very painful, and she launched people in her school who were very painful. I don't believe it's being taught that way in her school anymore, and I think that we've found over the years a lot more efficient ways of getting the same changes that she got. We have to remember that she grew up in a Victorian generation. But that said, there are areas in the body which store pain. And people don't necessarily feel pain there because they hold their bodies very still in that place so that they don't feel that pain. And sometimes that pain's associated with emotions, and sometimes it's just left over from a physical trauma. And I must say that if you really want to get areas of deep pain out of the body, I sometimes find it necessary to go in touch that area and the person feels that pain. Hopefully they're feeling that pain on the way out. So I would really like to make the distinction between imposing pain, pushing pain into the body, which is something I really don't want to do, and letting pain out of the body, which is something I really do want to do. So I must say that even after 35 years, there are some times when the techniques are painful. And I do think if you're going to stretch fascia efficiently, that you'll find that kind of sweet, stretchy pain in a yoga class, and that often people have much more fear of sensation as pain when they come in, and then they realize that this is opening the tissue, and then it doesn't feel painful anymore, it just feels stretchy. So it's a complicated issue, but I sure as hell hate it when I see people go around stripping muscles, as they call it, or just pounding into the tissue with the idea that that's going to result in a healthy body, because I don't think it is.
Because of our time, I'm going to bring a bunch of questions together, and they all have to do with the same subject, which is fibromyalgia. How does fascial treatment or treating fascia affect fibromyalgia?
I think I'll give you a chance for a second question. Fibromyalgia is a disease, or a disease condition anyway. I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to speak into it. I will say my own work, because there are so many body workers doing so many different things on this webinar. In my own work, I haven't found that certainly deep body work, fascial body work, is appropriate in the earlier stages. I think once the kind of autoimmune part of it is over and we're looking at the recovery and just resetting the fascial system and getting it rehydrated, it's great. But when in the early stages where it's very painful, and usually there is trauma associated with this, that digging into the body is not appropriate, and a more nutritional approach or the kinds of things that Leon Chaitow has detailed in his book would be better.
I have another question from Doreen Seeger in Auckland, New Zealand. And she was asking, is there an approach for reforming the arch in a flat foot?
The origin of flat foot. Well, let me take that in two ways. If somebody's had flat feet since birth and they never developed arches, I've always had flat feet, then I don't usually try to get those flat feet to come up. They've adapted to them for however many years they've had them, and I don't think that that's very easy to change or not even advisable to change. If somebody had arches and has lost them because their knees have rolled in, their feet have rolled in, or their pelvic floor has collapsed, there's a lot of relationship between breathing, pelvic floor, and the arches. And those can be restored, and I mentioned breathing deliberately. You changing around the diaphragm and the QL, quadratus lumborum, can help arches. Helping the pelvic floor can help arches, but certainly on a very obvious level, the muscles that reach down from the lower leg into the arch, tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, the fibularis muscles on the outside, and muscles of the deep compartment are all very important in providing that springy muscular control to the arch.
I have another question from Carl in Brookline, New Hampshire, and he asked, what is it that causes an emotional response when fascia is being released sometimes?
Yeah, is the emotion stored in the fascia, or the muscles, or is there such a thing as muscle memory or cellular memory? And I don't. There's a metaphoric way in which emotions, you can sort of wrap an emotion up with a bit of consciousness and stick it away in your body somewhere, and then and then you hold that part of the body very still so that you don't feel that emotion. And when that part is touched, out comes the emotion. But I'm not sure how complicated we need to get in terms of energetics or the actual biology of this. I just don't think we know it yet. But I absolutely see it all the time. You're exploring around, there's an area that's held, and that area, when it's touched, brings up tears, brings up anger, brings up fear. And you can definitely clear the air. You can definitely take these things and resolve them through body work. And I'm not suggesting acting like a armchair psychologist. I stick to the body. I look at the body pattern. I work with the body. I work with the body's reactions. I don't get involved in the story, but I would be a fool to say that it's not there because I see it almost every day.
Tom, when you're doing a fascial treatment, just from a massage therapist's point of view, I guess you typically recommend that they start it with the fascial treatment first, of course, before they put any lotion on their hands, so they have better traction with the tissue. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And do you have a preference with heat or cold of any type of hydrotherapy before you do your treatment?
Yeah, I'm just lazy. It might be that some paraffin therapy or hydrotherapy or putting somebody in a sauna might help. But and somebody was talking to me recently about infrared, and I don't really feel like bathing my clients in infrared. These are the kinds of things that you find out 10 years later that they cause cancer or something. Oops, I didn't mean that. I just meant that these, we try these things and then we find out later that they're different than we think. But it's really hard to raise the core body temperature, and that's what would have to happen for the fascia to be preheated. You are hydrating and heating and energizing the fascia with your touch. I know Bikram does his yoga in a hot room, but I'll tell you, you put a thermometer in everybody's mouth in that room, it would be 98.6, even though it's 105 in the room. To melt the fascia, so to speak, you would have to apply a lot of heat beforehand. I'd like to return just for a second to the lotion idea. If you put oil or lotion on your hands, you can be doing wonderful massage, but you're not doing fascial work. Because if you have oily hands or the client is oily, all you can do is push all the fascial layers down to the bone to get a release. That means you cannot distinguish among the layers. So if somebody's dry or your hands are dry, a little bit of lotion to just sort of give you the right kind of grab is fine. But if you're people come up to me when I'm giving a speech or something and say, oh yeah, I do a massage and then I do a little bit of your work. And I go, no, you aren't, not if the body is oiled up, because what we're doing is getting the fascial layers to slide on each other. And to get that kind of shear force through the fascial tissues, you really have to have a dry body. I use water most of the time. A little bit of water is, for one, it's cheap, and two, it's not oily.
I'm getting a signal from Eric that I have to wrap up, but I have one more question. It's kind of an interesting question from Jennifer, and she asks, working on fascia, can you reduce wrinkles?
Yes, you can, but it's staving off the inevitable so far as I'm concerned. If you can get down deep into the fascia, you might be able to stave off wrinkles for a little bit, but if you overwork it, you're going to stretch the fascia underneath the skin, and you'll probably cause more wrinkles. I'm afraid I'm not an esthetician, so this is not my field of expertise.
It's just I'm always fascinated where all the questions come from. And Tom, we had over 100 questions tonight. I wish we could have gotten to everyone's question. Thank you to everyone who submitted. There were some absolutely fascinating ones. There's actually a couple chapter questions that would take about an hour to go over with you, Tom. So really thank everybody that participated tonight. And I'm going to turn it back over to our co-host, or my co-host, Eric Brown.
Okay, one of you could. I'm trying to get into this chat room thing because I'm going to go off into it, and it's asking for a username, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, just type in your name.
Just type in my name?
Yeah, and submit. That's all you need to do.
Okay.
Tom Myers, King of Fascia, any of the things work?
Yeah, actually I do have other interests in life, but I know I've kind of gotten hung with that label.
So, Tom, we want to thank you so much for your presentation and really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise. I'm just sorry that these broadcasts aren't longer so we could get more into some of the clinical implications of this connectivity, which I think would be fascinating. But certainly people can visit your website for more information. And what's your website again? Do you just want to spell that out for people that are listening to this on MP3 afterwards?
Sure. anatomytrains.com, ANATOMYTRAINS.com. All one word.
Okay. So go to anatomytrains.com for more information on training and videos and other resources that Tom offers. And for our listeners, don't run away. We're about to broadcast some video that Tom has put together for us. And Tom is hopefully going to get into the chat room to answer questions you have. Now, if you're registered for the World Massage Conference, you also want to go and log into the site through the login box on the main page and take the continuing education quiz before the end of the evening. This is available for conference registrants only tonight. Now, Tom, would you like to just set up the video for us and tell us a little bit about what we're going to see?
It was a while ago that I sent it in to you, but I think you're going to see about 10 minutes on tensegrity, which I mentioned but did not explain, and this is taken from a thing that we call fascial DVD we call fascial tensegrity, which is about the fascia in general, as I was talking about earlier, and tensegrity in particular. And the second is so that you can see some of the technique that we're doing. As I say, the technique is just one application of the anatomy trains, but I put in about another 15 minutes of technique for people to look at.
Okay, fantastic.
Amazing image which shows about the same part of the body, but with the muscle tissue removed so that you can see these intermuscular septa and the whole fascial net between the femur and the skin. This was created by my colleague Jeff Lynn using data from the Visual Human Data Project, and when this is complete we will have a picture of the fascial man that we were talking about earlier.
A sailboat must be one of the best of human inventions, going through the water using nothing but the wind. But we didn't come out here for an ecology lesson. We came out to learn something about the body, and a sailboat can help teach us about how the body stands up. We're used to looking at structures like the lighthouse in the building behind me, where you've got one brick piled on top of another brick, all sitting on solid main granite, so that it's a continuous compression structure all the way down from the top of the lighthouse to the ground. And we think of our skeleton as being the same way, the head piled on top of the thorax, and the chest on top of the pelvis, and the pelvis on top of the legs. But you know, if you disappeared all of the soft tissue, the skeleton would fall to the ground. And a sailboat is a little bit instructed like that. A body is more like a sailboat than a lighthouse. The mast is kind of like a bone, or a series of bones like the spine, and the stays, the shrouds, are really like the myofasciae of the body, offering extra support in a tensional way, not just a compressional way. If you suddenly disappeared all these stays off the sailboat, the mast would fall down under the pressure of the sail. You really need these guys on this side to keep it tight. If we went over and waggled the shrouds on the other side, you'd see that they were very loose. But when we turn the boat the other way, they'll be tight again. Same thing is true of the body. If you look at this structure here, this is kind of taking the sailboat idea to an extreme. These tensegrity structures were invented by Kenneth Snelson, a sculptor, and popularized by Buckminster Fuller, a designer in the 1960s. It works off a whole new geometry. But if you look here carefully, you'll see that the dowels are supported in a balanced way, without even touching each other, by the balance of the rubber bands. And the body is very much the same way. If you disappeared all these rubber bands, all the dowels would clatter to the floor. And the same thing is true of the body. If you disappeared all the soft tissue, all the bones would clatter to the floor. We have this kind of illusion because we look at those skeletons in the classroom. They're all wired together, so we think of the skeleton as a solid framework on which the muscles work, but it's not that way at all. The bones float in the soft tissue in the same way that these dowels float inside the rubber bands. Now, when you start to look at these structures, they have a bunch of interesting properties that are very much like the properties bodies have. If I create a shortness in this part of the soft tissue, you can see that the whole structure deforms in a way. Let's see if I can keep it still enough here so that you can see that. See how the whole structure goes? So I could have a shortness over in this part of the body and be complaining of pain over in this part where it's changing. The same thing is true of structural body work. You can have somebody saying, oh, the pain's in my neck. And I start to work over here, and they say, no, the pain's up here in my neck. I say, well, that may be where you're hurting, but this is where the problem is. This is where the shortness is. Kind of bone manipulation techniques like chiropractic and osteopathy tend to look at knocking the bones back into place, which can also work to restore balance to the structure of the body. But long-term, chronic postural difficulties are often set in the soft tissue in such a way that resetting the bones simply won't last. The soft tissue will again pull the bones out of place. So what we're looking at here in terms of what we want is an even, balanced tone across the myofasciae of the body so that the bones will stay lightly, easily floating in place. The Anatomy Trains theory is looking at how the myofasciae of the body cover the bones, not just this muscle going from here to here, but in the series of continuous rubber bands that work their way around the human structure, which is a good deal more complicated than this structure, so that we can achieve the kind of balance that leads to ease and harmony and lack of pain. So the traditional view of the body, in fact, the view espoused by my teacher, Ida Rolf, sees the body as a bunch of blocks, and she had the bunch of blocks inside the plastic bag there, and it's a question of how do you arrange the blocks inside the plastic bag to get a natural alignment of the body. And that's a powerful image, but you can get even more powerful about the effectiveness of myofascial work if you look at the geometry, at the balance in the geometry between tension and compression. So, next slide, please. If you consider the body as a bunch of blocks, then you want to line those blocks up, boom, 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 on the gravity line, and if you're leaning back, it'll go into tension on the front, and if you lean forward, it'll go into tension on the back. So we begin to see the guy wires that are holding the skeleton up as beginning to be important, but we can get even a little more sophisticated than that. Following on that traditional way of looking at the body, if you look here, what we have is a block of wood sitting on a horizontal block of wood going down to the two, and the lines that are drawn on there are showing how the stresses go. And of course that's very similar to how the spine sits on the pelvis, sits on the legs, and you can see in the lines of stress drawn in there, you can see the sacrum defined in the compression here, that kind of triangle. You can see the pelvic floor defined in the tension that goes underneath, and you can even see the femoral heads defined in the compression that's coming up from the other legs. You can see a very similar thing here and an actual cut through the pelvis, how the sacrum sits down on this block of wood, which sets down into there, and both the soft and the bony tissues arrange themselves in that way. But now here's a little more sophisticated in the sense of the balance between tension and compression. More sophisticated in this case is 1938. You see the body segments lined up here, but the MCs are the muscle centers. The muscle centers counterbalance the tendency of the blocks to curl up into the fetal position, and so there's one on the bottom of the foot, one on the back of the leg, one on the front of the thigh, in the butt and the lower back, the chest and the neck. And the figure on the right gives us an example of what can happen if that starts to get out of balance. What you get instead is tightness in the shins, tightness in the hamstrings, tightness in the groin, tightness in the mid-back, tightness in the throat. Okay, so this slide shows us what we were looking at on the boat, but more precisely, exactly how the mast of the spine is arranged like a sailboat. If you look at the boat there, you have the two shrouds coming from the front of the boat up to the top of the mast, and then in our case the scalenes going down to the gaff of the first rib, and the rib cage is like the sail, and then the sail is from the boom, which would be the bottom of the rib cage, is sheeted back to the hull of the pelvis by the rectus abdominis. So we really are arranged like a sailboat, and that allows the mast to be thinner and lighter than it otherwise would have to be. But it's still a continuous mast from the head down to the sacrum, and ours is a segmented spine. So let's look at something even a little more dependent on the tension. This is a beautiful structure constructed by a German architect named Otto Frey. What you're looking at here is almost like the stem of a plant. In fact, he was looking at how do sunflowers turn and face the sun as the sun changes in the sky all day. and he came up with this kind of structure where what you've got is a series of independent segments that fit into each other like a ball into a socket, or one golf tee into another would be the closest thing I could think of. And around each golf tee is a plexiglass circle which they cut into triangles with holes drilled through it. And say you start in with 12 lines going up through this thing. The 12th one ends at the last circle. But the 11 keep on going through, and then the 11th one is tied off here, and the 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, 5, 4, until you get to the top one, which only has that last cable, which has gone all the way up the inside here. Now, you have a mess of cables down here. You have 36 cables. I did 12. I don't know how many this is, but I'm doing 12 for a reason. You have 36 cables down here. You've got to tie up all those cables around drums, but if you did that by winding this drum, this drum, this drum, this drum, this drum, you could take this tent mast and put it anywhere you wanted it to be in any shape. And our back does the same thing. You kind of get in under the cupboard under the sink, and then you look around till you can see the nut, and then you go back that way so you can get your arm in, and then you put your arm in and get the drain off the bottom of the thing. There are muscles like this, the iliocostalis in your back, that do exactly this kind of thing from rib to rib to rib, and allow your back to stabilize itself in whatever godforsaken position you have to get it into to do whatever chore you have to do on a Sunday afternoon. So this more approaches what a spine is in terms of the balance between tension and compression, because here first, this is the first structure that we've seen that if we cut all the wires, it would fall down. And that's the same is true of your spine. And we can go even a little farther down that road. These structures are called tensegrity structures, and were invented by Kenneth Snelson, an artist, and popularized by Buckminster Fuller. And if you look at this structure, you can see that none of the sticks are touching each other. They're all held in place by the balance of the rubber bands, or wires, or whatever they used here. This is quite an amazing structure, and as you can see, it's a mast, kind of like the spine, and none of those wooden things are touching each other. They stay right where they are on the balance of the rubber bands. So I brought a couple of these models in for you to look at. Why don't you play with this, pass it around, and I'll talk to the people in video land with this one. As you can see, the bones, the dowels, are floating in the balance provided by the rubber bands. In fact, you could say that the dowels are pushing out against the rubber bands, and that's the conception of the bones in the myofascial meridians theory. And these rubber bands that go continually around the whole structure are the myofasciae, the myofascial meridians. And where they tack down to the bones are what we've been calling the stations. This is another way of looking at the whole thing. These structures have a number of properties that are a bit like bodies. For one thing, if you put stress into this structure, for instance, if this was a whiplash, or this was an injury of some sort, you see how the strain is taken by the whole structure. It's not right where the impact comes. The impact is distributed through the myofasciae all over the structure. And of course, these rubber bands are the pathway by which the strain is distributed. The other thing is, look at these two dowels here that are parallel to you. If I push these two dowels together, the other two dowels are going to go apart, right? The ones that are parallel to you? Watch. As I push these dowels together, the other dowels come together too. You can see it that way also. Bodies act the same way. If you put strain and stress into one part of the body, the whole body shrinks. It shrinks in height, it shrinks in width, it shrinks in depth. It doesn't have to shrink in all three of them, but it can. And as you unravel the body, as you unwind the body, as you let go of the strain in the myofasciae, what you see is an expansion that happens all over the body. You get an expansion in width, an extension in depth, and an extension of height that Rolfers tend to call lift. The
The other thing about these structures that's interesting is if you take and you put strain in one piece of the myofasciae, you might see a problem emerging somewhere else, right? Not anywhere near where the problem is, because as the strain takes itself around the structure, the pain may end up somewhere else. So that's another thing in myofascial work that we look at is you might be working quite far from the site of injury or the site of pain. Okay, so just to reiterate, the reason for this journey through geometry is to see that the dowels are like the bones and that they push the myofasciae apart. And the myofascia are like the rubber bands that are holding the bones in place. And in this conception, and the power of this conception is that you can see how balancing the myofasciae will set where the skeleton sits. So that we can really powerfully change the whole structure, myofascial and skeletal, by working with the myofascials.
Okay, so in doing this work on the back, I'm employing a bench here that it's an adjustable bench, which is desirable if you have it. I've set it so that Bill's hips are just a little bit higher than his knees, and I'm going to arrange his feet now so that they're a little bit in front of where they would normally be and closer together than he would normally keep them sitting in a chair like this. This is going to direct the force along the superficial back line as we do this work. But before we actually do the work, let's do an assessment. And to do this, I'm going to have Bill go forward one vertebra at a time. So just nod your head, Bill, and let your chin fall to your chest, and notice that stretch along the back of your neck. And now just letting your forehead bring you forward. You go forward one vertebra at a time, bending this one and this one and this one. And I'm noticing in this assessment, as I feel the spinous processes and as I watch the spinous processes, I'm watching where do they fan out, where do they get farther apart from each other, and where are they kind of clumped together, like this one. I know that's pretty hard to see in a videotape, but it's a lot easier to see in life. And I'm just suggesting to Bill if he can lay his chest on his thighs, great. If not, great. But I'm seeing that bend, and again I'm seeing a whole clump of vertebrae down here that aren't moving relative to each other. So now this second part of the assessment becomes part of the treatment as well. I'm going to ask Bill to just drop your tailbone towards the chair, and then your sacrum, and then L5, and stack these up like a set of checkers, one at a time, pulling from the bottom, like those little toys that have a string. You pull down on the string and the legs and arms come out. Okay, now right here he's having trouble stacking these up, so I'm just going to give a little assistance with my fingers, and coming up and stacking these up. Good. Okay, and then we got to there and he jumped to here. So, and if he'd continued with that, his head would have come up to here, which, as you can see, would have put his head in front of his body. We'd like to see his head come up on top of his body. So how can we help that? As he comes up to here, I say, now let your sternum put your head on. Remember what we did before on the superficial front line? Well, now that's a little bit too far. Let's just come to where you're looking out horizontal or so. But that situates your head much more over your body. Okay, but that's not the extent of the treatment. We're going to actually apply our hands to the superficial back line here, and keeping in mind that we want the superficial back line to go down, I am going to once again conform the first phalange of my hands to his shoulders and bring that tissue down the back. Now, Bill, you're going to do the same thing. Let your chin drop and begin to let the weight of your forehead carry you forward. And feel your feet strongly on the floor. So your legs, that's it. So your legs are strong and your back is relaxed. Now, in this case, is going over your hair a problem?
No.
I don't know why, but going up that sensitive front is always more of a problem with hair than coming down the back. It doesn't seem to be a problem as much. So I am traveling over the skin, and if you see now, I am really putting quite a bit of weight down into his body. I'm even up on my toes to do it, but I am not working. Can you stay there for a minute, Bill? Would that be all right? So if I stand back here and I work with my muscles, you can hear it right away in my voice that I am straining. But if I lean forward and get my weight over his body, which you can see where my hands are now, and I just drop my weight onto my hands, he actually feels it deeper in his body, and I'm not sweating and swinking. I am not working hard. I worked hard for enough of my life. This is it. I'm going lazy. So, no, the point is not to be lazy. The point is to be sensitive, and if you're using your weight, you can be sensitive. Okay, now Bill, come on back up. And again, we're stacking this up, and we find those little guys. Don't go too far ahead here. We'll just find these little guys, and we'll let them come forward as you stack up. Let them, that's it. Arch just a little bit right in there. Good. And as we come to the top, don't forget the sternum bit. It lifts to lift your head on. That's it. You don't have to come too far back. Just let your head float right up. Lovely. So a variation on this, you saw me doing this with my hands. You can also do this with elbows, with those whose back are a little more recalcitrant, or if your fingers are running out of steam. Okay, so once again, Bill, I want to feel your feet coming back at me. Right, so your back is soft, your neck is soft. Well, your neck is soft at this point. Everything that I've gone by is soft. Is that too much pressure, or is that okay?
That's fine.
And just let yourself slowly go forward. That's the same motion of each vertebra going down. And I'm just leaning in with my elbows, and because I have eyes in my elbows, I'm listening for where are the tough spots. So I just found one over here, so I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to have you push back to me from your feet. That's it. Not from your back, but from your feet. Your legs are strong. Your back is long. Okay? You feel that little spot in there? Yeah. You can even lean to the left with your head to stretch that out. Feel that pulling? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you use your little stretch right in there to make this more. Good. Okay, come back to the middle. And let's get on the train again and keep on going down. Let your head relax, just vertebra by vertebra going down. And you'll notice that I'm not on the point of my elbow. I was working with the point of my elbow a minute ago to get that particular spot. But now I'm working with the flat of my elbow. So I'm covering quite a bit of area in his back. So even though I'm leaning into him with a good deal of my body weight, I don't think it's hurting him because it's distributed out over a fairly wide space. And I can carry that in people who don't have, if somebody feels pain when they're doing this, and you don't want to put a lot of pressure on their lower back, but if they are not and the low back is strong, you can go right on down to the sacrum with this move.